All right. It looks like we've got Kent, Jones, and Beltran coming to Cooperstown this summer.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully, and thanks so much for making Locked On the number one sports podcasting network out there. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter, or whatever it's called these days, and on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully, at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And the best way to get a hold of me is right here on the YouTubes. Or if you're part of the Everydayer Club, then you know what? Then you can join us on the Discord where I talk to a lot of our fans right there. Let's get to matters at hand here. We're going to do the trivia question in the third segment, just so you know. I haven't forgotten the trivia question. But there's big news that happened as the Baseball Hall of Fame ballot was announced. In the first segment today, we're going to be talking about the results of the Hall of Fame. Second segment, I'm actually going to take us back in time. I'm going to show you what I predicted was going to happen, and I recorded that last night, so you can tell those are my actual real predictions. And the third spot, we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to do the trivia question in the third spot, but we're also going to take a look at the 2027 ballot, which is going to be interesting as well. But okay, first and foremost, let's offer a big congratulations. First and foremost to Carlos Beltran. Beltran had a terrific career, played for a bunch of teams, a native of Puerto Rico, so he gets to join the players like, Orlando Cepeda and Roberto Clemente, who are natives of Puerto Rico, who are now in the Hall of Fame. Rookie of the year, and he had some very great years, and he had a lot of longevity. He was a terrific player for a very long period of time. In 1999, he was the Rookie of the Year and had a terrific, jumped right out of the gate with the Kansas City Royals, and was still a productive player, a productive everyday player basically through 2016. He was an All-Star in 2016. His final year with Houston, where he won his lone World Series ring, and got in trouble for being part of the cheating scandal in 2017. But he checked just about every box you would expect. If you did get that World Series ring, which not everyone likes to talk about, multiple All-Stars, Gold Glove, Silver Slugger, and just really consistent in terms of terrific power, really consistent in good speed, really consistent at a sky-high OPS, really consistent in just being a tremendous all-around player who was involved in two of the most, for the fans of their teams, frustrating moments of a game ending without a swing. He had the called third strike against him to end the 2006 NLCS. I can't tell you how often I think about how Mets history would have been different, how Carlos Delgado's career and legacy would have been different, because you would have made an argument he would have been the MVP of that series and was a huge part of that Mets team if he just took a hack at it. But he had a chance for redemption in the 2013 World Series with a real solid chance for the Cardinals to take a 3-game 1-1 lead over Boston, and with Beltran at the plate as the tying run, and Colton Wong got picked off at first. So two of the most bizarre endings to a postseason game ever sadly involved Beltran that way. But do you know what? He had a great career, and I would have voted for him. I absolutely would have voted for him as Hall. He was a Hall of Famer. I may have taken a little bit to get around on that. I don't know if I thought of him immediately as a Hall of Famer, but no problem with it. I don't think anyone could have a problem with it. Terrific all-around player, and did so for a long period of time. He had great peaks, and he did for a long time, which seems to be one of the big qualifiers if you want to be considered for a Hall of Fame career. Andruw Jones is a fascinating figure to make it to the Hall of Fame. Defensive and center field was probably second to none, at least in players that I've seen in my life. And I've seen some great center fielders. I've seen Griffey, I've seen Edmonds, I've seen, Freddie Lynn early in his career before his injuries, Eric Davis. I've seen some terrific center fielders in my life. And defensively, they don't get much better than Andruw Jones. He had terrific power, hit 51 in 2005, 41 home runs the next year. He had great speed right out of the gate, came up huge in his first World Series when he was a member of the Braves against the Yankees in 1996, and played primarily with the Braves, 12 years with them. He had 1 year with Los Angeles that didn't go particularly, was actually kind of a disaster. And then he didn't do too well with the Rangers. And then he was mediocre with the White Sox. And he had two, I guess, he had one okay year with the Yankees. I mean, kind of like if you only remember him from 08 to 12, he had a couple really down years along the way. But his peak was sky high. And he did it for, roughly a decade of unparalleled defense, great offense, and coming up big in a bunch of playoff series, including that first World Series he played in. And if you look, I mean, there are some series like in the 2004 division series, he came up big in losing causes. In the 2004 division series, which Atlanta lost to Houston, lost to Carlos Beltran, he batted .526. He slugged 947. His OPS in that series was 1.519. His OPS in a losing cause against the Astros the next year was 1.347. I mean, he had a bunch of series where he went banana boats and the team lost. All those years with Atlanta, he missed the one World Series title. But there you go. No problem with either one of them getting in the Hall of Fame. And joining Jeff Kent, who I don't have a problem with him being in the Hall of Fame. I just feel like Jones, Beltran, and Kent, yes, all Hall of Famers, all worth celebrating, all worth having their plaques there. But I can't help but think about there's a lot of other players who also deserve it. There's a lot of other players who are just on the outside looking in. And it does feel weird. It does feel weird. Yes, I mean, we're not having Bonds. We're not having Clemens in. Bonds and, and McGuire and Sosa aren't in. A-Rod didn't get voted in. I'll get to him a little bit in segment 3 because he's still on the ballot. And also other players who I mentioned before, like, Delgado was on the ballot. I thought he was a worthy candidate. Friend of the podcast, Dale Murphy, who was the MVP of baseball and his peak was insanely high. And players like Lou Whitaker and Dave Stieb and Bobby Grich and Tommy John and Dwight Evans and Kenny Lofton, who I think all had Hall of Fame careers and I would argue may have had a greater impact on the sport than Andruw Jones, Carlos Beltran, and Jeff Kent, all of whom, I can't stress this enough, I believe belong in the Hall of Fame. I'm a big Hall guy. I'm not a Mel Hall guy. He did weird things with Wildcats, but I'm a big Hall guy. And I hope that some of the players that I just rattled off find their way to Cooperstown eventually. Because this is nothing against Jones, Beltran, and Kent. All worthy candidates. Glad they're all in. I just want to see a few more players up on that stage. Well, with that in mind, we're going to go back in time. When we come back, we are going to talk a little bit about my predictions. Let's hear from our good friends over at TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. TurboTaxes make it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can still have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out those forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or you can connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work with you to get every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right on the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives a real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150, all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get on with your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Thanks so much for making Locked On MLB your first listen of the day, and thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, check out the new Everydayer Club. You get ad-free audio from the Locked On MLB show. It's similar to like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you also get access to the Everydayer Club Discord. And I'm on there a lot, interacting with fans, and it's a lot of fun. So check us out at lockedonmlb.supercast.com. Okay, folks, fans of the show and everything, I am pulling a little bit of a Marty McFly here because I've gone back in time. I am recording this part of the episode. It is right now about 10:30 at night on Monday, the day before the announcements, and I have no idea who's in right now. So what I'm going to do is this. I like to show that my predictions are for real. I'm not messing around here. So I'm going to do my predictions of who I think will get in. And then I'm also going to say who I want to get in. And you can compare that to what we just heard. You just heard the episode where they made the announcement. I've had my reaction to it and all that. Who is joining Jeff Kent instead of all the other very worthy people who are on the ballot. Jeff Kent, too, I'm not saying doesn't belong in. It's just odd. He was the only one who got through. And so let's take a look at who is available. Now, I'm first going to say who I think is going to get in. Who is going to join Jeff Kent? I do think Carlos Beltran is getting in. I think his teammate on the 2004 Astros is in, and so there you go. And the first member of he is the first member of a World Series champion Astros team to make it to the Hall of Fame. Now, that's the World Series we must not mention, but I digress. I think Carlos Beltran is getting in. I think Andruw Jones is also getting in. I think that those two, Andruw Jones, who is one of the great center fielders I certainly have ever seen, had a marvelous career both at the plate and in the field. You got Beltran, you got Andruw Jones. And then that's it. I predict those are the only two who are getting in. I don't think Chase Utley is going to make the cut in his third year. I think they're going to ignore A-Rod again. I think Manny Ramirez is falling off the ballot. I think Bobby Abreu, who has an interesting case, one that I think is worth listening to. I think he's going to get a little bit of momentum. And I think Andy Pettit is still going to hang around for another year, but I don't think he's going to get in. As for the first timers, and I think also Dustin Pedroia will get a few votes, but as will Felix Hernandez. I think Felix Hernandez is going to be hampered by the fact that his peak wasn't as long. The same thing for Cole Hamels. And I think David Wright is just I think you're going to see his momentum fall a little bit. For the first timers, you have Cole Hamels will probably get some votes, but who else? Ryan Braun? No. Edwin Encarnacion? No. Howie Kendrick? No. Wow. Howie Kendrick, a World Series champion national, is already on there. Time is flying. But Alex Gordon? No. I mean, he should be in the Royals Hall of Fame, but no. Shin-Soo Choo, Nick Markakis. Nick Markakis has actually had a really interesting career. Not a Hall of Fame career, but a really interesting career. But Hunter Pence, Gio Gonzalez, Frankie Rodriguez, Matt Kemp, Daniel Murphy, Rick Porcello, all had fine careers. All were terrific, be proud of what they've done. But of that group, no, there's none of those first timers should even be on the ballot next year, with the lone exception of maybe Cole Hamels. But that's it. That is totally it. And I think that it will be Carlos Beltran and Andruw Jones, I think, will be the two who get in. And I have, by the way, for the record, I have zero problem with Carlos Beltran being in the Hall of Fame. I have zero problem with Andruw Jones being in the Hall of Fame. I don't really have a problem with Jeff Kent being in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if I would necessarily been voting for him, but I don't have an issue with him. But I think that's going to be the class that we celebrate. Andruw Jones, Jeff Kent, Carlos Beltran. That's my prediction. Now, if your pal Sully was in charge, I'm a big Hall guy. I supported my, I gave my feelings. I want Bonds and Clemens in there. I think A-Rod belongs in the Hall of Fame. I don't care if he failed those tests. I really don't. He's the greatest third baseman in the history of the New York Yankees. He had an unbelievable career. Even if you want to reduce some of his numbers based upon, grading on some, juicer curve, fine. He's still a Hall of Famer. Absolutely he is. And the vitriol they had for Alex Rodriguez throughout his career, even before we knew he, was taking PEDs, was really always kind of bizarre to me. And we know Pudge Rodriguez had dirtiness in his past, and he's in the Hall of Fame. And I think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. Absolutely. And we know David Ortiz had some dirty tests. And I love David Ortiz, and he's in the Hall of Fame, and I want him in the Hall of Fame. A-Rod deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, whether you like him or not. He deserves to be in the freaking Hall of Fame. I know Manny Ramirez doesn't have a chance of ever getting in the Hall of Fame because he failed 2 tests. I think it would be worth it to have him in the Hall of Fame just to hear his speech. He always made me laugh very hard. I would have those 2 in. I would vote in Beltran. I would vote in Andruw Jones. I'd have to think long and hard about Chase Utley and Bobby Abreu. You can make some convincing cases for me right there. But that would be my Hall. That absolutely. I would have A-Rod. I would have Manny Ramirez. I would have Beltran. And I would have Andruw Jones. If you want to make your pitch for Bobby Abreu, you want to make your pitch for Andy Pettit. Pettit is a tough Hall for me. It really is. Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley, if you want to make your cases for that, I'll listen. I don't see a case for Ryan Braun, Cole Hamels, or Edwin Encarnacion. And I think Dustin Pedroia, his peak was too short. And Mark Burley and Felix Hernandez were great, had great peaks as well. But that's what I want. A-Rod, Manny, Carlos Beltran, and Andruw Jones. Those would be the 4 that I would have, and have a 5-person Hall of Fame ballot, Hall of Fame induction going on this summer. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be Kent is going to be joined by Carlos Beltran and Andruw Jones, which again, I think 3 worthy members of the Hall of Fame. I just find it strange that we're really going to do this. We're really going to continue to exclude some of the people who helped write the history of baseball in the Hall of Fame. Now, maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. And I'm not even like a huge A-Rod guy. I find some of the vitriol placed against him to be just bizarre. But what are you going to do? So there you go. We'll see. You already know how accurate that was, but I made that prediction the night before. And all right, so we're going to go to the 3rd segment, where in the 3rd segment, we're going to talk a little bit about the aftermath of the results and take a peek at the ballot for next year. All right, before we get going here, I do want to go through the trivia question. The trivia question I put on the other day was a free agent-based trivia question, which was, what teams did Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally sign after they were granted free agency? They were the 2 pioneers of modern-day free agency. Messersmith and McNally were the first 2 to be granted. And who did they sign with? Now, Ginger Beard 327 said, I thought McNally retired and Messersmith Yankees are twins, you're half right. McNally was actually going to retire. He didn't play at all the previous season, so he didn't really care much about it. He was part of an experiment to see if he can get free agency after playing with the Montreal Expos. So he actually didn't sign with anybody. But there was one other player that there was Messersmith and Scott Horsemeyer and everyday. Messersmith signed with the small market Braves, and McNally retired out of disgust of the new economic structure of baseball. Well, I don't know if that's why he retired. Maybe he was. I don't remember that element. But yes, Ted Turner and the Atlanta Braves jumped right into the free agent market and signed Andy Messersmith. All right. So I mentioned I'm a big Hall guy. I like to have lots of Hall of Famers in there. And as I said the other day, some people vehemently disagreed with me. But I think the whole we can't include juicers in the Hall of Fame argument has I think that's already out the window. I think we've seen players with dirty tests who have been elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I think there's just a weird, I don't know, like there's a weird double standard that people have. And I think partly because people don't like A-Rod. People don't like Bonds. People don't like Clemens. And so they're able to hide their, for the lack of a better word, be sort of self-righteous, saying, oh, we're not going to let a cheater in the Hall of Fame, while still voting for Rodriguez and Ortiz, who are two insanely likable players, but who we know have, dirty past. And there are other players who also like Bonds and Clemens, never turned in a dirty result, but just are super suspicious. And we've talked about them all the time. The fact of the matter is, yeah, I think it's more about personality. And it's funny, the personality that we tend to forgive players who seem to be, nicer and nicer to the press and have a squeaky clean image. Bob Costas, and I love Bob Costas, okay? The one time I met him, he was extraordinarily nice to me and left a really nice message on my voicemail. And he was talking about Andy Pettitte and his checkered PED past. And he was saying, well, but he said he only was using it to rehab and he never did for performance enhancing. And I take him at his word. We're taking players at their word. First of all, Andy Pettitte was caught. And at first he said he didn't do anything. And they said, oh, I only did it once. And I was crying and praying to Jesus the whole time, or whatever he said. Because Andy Pettitte seems like a likable dude. He was crisscrossing the country. He was pulling a Donald Secretti and crisscrossing the country with Roger Clemens, who we all know was shooting God knows what into his body, and just happened to be doing it with Andy Pettitte. And the whole time was like, oh, Andy was like, no, please don't inject that into me. No, that's not how PEDs work. And I don't blame Andy Pettitte. I don't blame anyone. But come on, this whole sort of, oh, he did it once and he hated it the whole time he was doing it. Stop. S-T-O-P-P, stop. S-T-A-H-P, stop. Stop this double standard. Well, who's going to be on the ballot next year? All right, let's take a look at the final results. One thing I find really interesting is that when Andruw Jones first appeared on the ballot, he got 7.8% of the ballot. So he barely hung on. If only a few more people didn't vote for him, he would have been a one and done. And this year he got 78%. So he got 10 times the number of voters on his ninth ballot they did on his first. When you're landing single digits in your first time out there, you're probably thinking you're out the next time. You're probably thinking, boy, I'm going to be skedaddling. So you take a look at some of the players like Torrey Hunter got 8.7. Well, he's not going to be able to climb all the way up. But David Wright sitting at 14.8% of the vote. Who knows? Who knows? Andy Pettitte is roughly at, approaching 50%. Chase Utley is at the only one to be on more than half the ballots who didn't get voted in was Utley. with 59.1%. His teammate Jimmy Rollins is at 25%. A-Rod got a few more. He's up to 50%. And he's got 5 more years on the ballot. So can he get, Andruw Jones got 333 votes. That was enough to get him in. Can A-Rod basically get, another 140 votes or something like that? Can he win over that? I would like to see that. Probably not going to happen. I'm always intrigued by who got 1 vote, basically to put someone on their ballot and have that player buy them a steak dinner. Nick Markakis got 1 vote. Alex Gordon got 1 vote. Bizarrely, Rick Porcello got 2 votes. Rick Porcello, wonderful pitcher, won a Cy Young Award. 2 people put him on the Hall of Fame vote, as did Hunter Pence, as did Matt Kemp. Sin-Shu Chu got 3 votes. Edwin Encarnacion got 6 votes. No word yet on the Parrot. And Ryan Braun got 15 votes and fell off the ballot on the first. When you get 15, that means some of them were literally thinking he was a Hall of Famer. And I'm not sure, why, but Ryan Braun is not going to get in because he didn't have a long enough peak. But some people will act self-righteous about his PED use. So there you go. Well, I hope that next year I would love to see Buster Posey in the next ballot. And you can convince me some of the other players along the way. And I'd love to see A-Rod in there, even though in my heart of hearts, I don't think he's going to. But there you go. And thanks for tuning in to Locked On MLB. This week, we're going to hopefully talk about all the great signings that are going on. Oh, my God, can you believe where Bellinger went? Can you believe where Framber Valdez went? Make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On MLB so you get all the latest episodes. And follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever it's called these days, and on the Instagram. And if you want to join the Everydayer Club, you can listen to the show without ads, and you can have access to the Discord channel. And I love interacting with all of you there. Go to lockedonmlb.supercast.com for that. And for those of you on video, make sure to go to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. All right, we're going to go to the trivia question today. It's a little bit complicated, but why not? We're talking to Hall of Famers, and here we go. What 2 future Hall of Famers who were teammates on the 1992 A's played for 9 different franchises each? The 1992 A's had a pair of players who made it to the Hall of Fame. They may have had multiple players who made it to the Hall of Fame, but they had 2 players who were teammates, and each played for 9 different franchises. Put your answer down here in YouTube or on Discord or at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever the platform is called. Talking about the Hall of Fame results and my hopes for a big haul leading up. This has been Locked On MLB. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.